The Oklahoma City Thunder have had a lot of ups and downs since they moved to OKC back in 2008. They've made the conference finals, NBA finals, had multiple MVPs, traded away multiple MVPs, and fallen victim to some of the most heartbreaking moments in recent NBA history. But out of all the years the franchise has existed, the 2019-2020 season may be the most interesting out of all of them. It was a weird season for the NBA as a whole between the temporary suspension of the season in March due to the pandemic, and of course the eventual restart of the bubble, but the Thunder were a particularly intriguing team that year. They went from surefire lottery team headed towards rebuild, to pretty fun story, to legitimately terrifying playoff threat over the span of the 72 games played that year, shattering all expectations along the way. As a Thunder fan, it may have been the most fun I've ever had in a single season, and is perhaps my favorite singular team of all time. Today, I want to ramble for a bit about one of my favorite teams ever, the 2020 Thunder, the team that proved everyone wrong. But first, I want to go ahead and thank the sponsor of today's video, 1v1me, the best platform to stake on esports. If you haven't heard of them, 1v1me is a site and iOS mobile app that you can use to stake on 50 plus events per week that feature the best players in games like UFC 4, Madden, FIFA, Rocket League, and of course, NBA 2K as well as others. Here's how it works. All you have to do is go through the website or the app and find a match that you might want to stake on. You can see what game is being played, what the format is, and also who's involved. That includes some stats that you can use to better educate who you think is actually going to win. Things like how many events they've played, how many wins they've gotten, what's their win percentage, wins as underdogs, and also how are they doing in their last 5? Are they on a hot streak or have they cooled off a bit at the moment? You can take all this information into account and ultimately pick someone to stake on. Once you've done that, you can even watch the matchup live right there on the site so you stay directly in tune with the action as it happens. 1v1me also has matches going on all the time at basically all hours, and it's paid out over $10 million to users at this point. There's a lot of ways to play, and 1v1me even gave me a code that y'all can use to get $10 added to your first stake. That code is 3CONE, that's the number 3 and then CONE in all caps. I'll have it below me here somewhere on the screen as well as down below in the description, alongside a link that you can use to go check out 1v1me on the web. Quick reminder that you must be 18 years or older to stake on 1v1me, and I want to thank them for sponsoring this video. Now let's go ahead and get back to the Thunder. Heading into the 2019 offseason, the Thunder were in a bit of a limbo. They just lost in the first round for the third straight year following KD's departure, despite adding some more star power alongside Russ. They traded for PG and Melo heading into the 2017-18 season, two moves that a younger me at that time thought were going to make us contenders, but instead earned us a first round exit at the hands of rookie Donovan Mitchell and the Utah Jazz. This was primarily due to a season-ending injury and really career-ending injury to Andre Roberson, one of the league's best perimeter defenders, as well as lackluster play from Carmelo Anthony, who declined rapidly the second he got to Oklahoma City because of course he did. So, Melo was traded away following the season, but Paul George remained, and the 2018-19 Thunder showed some promise, with Paul George having the best season of his career, averaging 28 points per game, 8.2 boards, and 4.1 dimes to go with 2.2 steals, en route to a top 3 finish in Defensive Player of the Year and MVP voting. Behind the play of he and Russ, the team finished the year as the 6th seed, which was not that bad in a really tough Western Conference, as they had a 49-33 record. As you probably know, the Thunder would end up facing off against the Blazers in the first round, where Dame did exactly what you know he did. So, the Thunder had tried running it with just Russ in his MVP season, they had tried getting him Melo and PG, they tried with just Russ and PG, they tried a bunch of different combinations, but none of it had worked. So now they had the choice of either again trying to retool around Russ and maybe Paul George, or heading into a rebuild for the first time since the team got to Oklahoma City. In a way, they kind of went down both paths. It began when, out of the blue at like 1 a.m. Eastern time, the Thunder traded Paul George to the Clippers in exchange for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Danilo Gallinari, and a historic haul of draft picks. This move wasn't prefaced by a ton of rumors like we typically see nowadays. There wasn't a public trade request by Paul George. Really wasn't much lead up to it at all. It just kind of happened, breaking NBA Twitter when it did. At this point, the Clippers were in hot pursuit of Kawhi Leonard in free agency and needed to acquire Paul George in order to land him. So they went ahead and offered the Thunder a record-breaking package to secure the services of both superstars. It was revealed later that Paul George did indeed put in a Clipper-specific trade request to Sam Presti through his agent, a request that shocked the Thunder GM, but ultimately a request that he decided to fulfill once he saw the Clippers' offer. Following this move, Russ was, again, left as the lone superstar on the Thunder. but it felt like it probably wouldn't be that way for long. Once we traded Paul George, I knew a Russ trade was coming. As much as it was going to hurt because I was always a Russell Westbrook guy, he was my favorite player of all time. At that point, I just kind of expected it, and apparently he had even spoken to the Thunder about the possibility of being moved before the PG trade even went down. So Russ was eventually going to be dealt, and that trade came in July as he was traded to the Houston Rockets in exchange for Chris Paul, 2 first-round picks, and 2 first-round pick swaps. This reunited Russ with his former backcourt mate in James Harden, a move that seemingly made the Houston Rockets one of the more formidable teams out there in the West. Meanwhile, the Rockets, in the process, shipped out Chris Paul, who had been a vital part of their success in 2017 and 18 as they fought to take down the juggernaut Golden State Warriors, to no avail. But at this point, he was no longer in his prime at 34 years old and had become injury prone. In fact, at that time, a lot of people thought Chris Paul was basically untradeable with those issues lingering and a contract that owed him $124 million over the next 3 years. Around the league, he was genuinely viewed to be a negative asset at that point, a massive fall for the once superstar point guard. Yet the Rockets found a deal to be made, picking up a recent MVP in Russ and sending out the seemingly declining Paul alongside draft compensation so the Thunder would take on his deal. It was, like I said earlier, a sad but inevitable end to the Russell Westbrook era in Oklahoma City, and seemingly the beginning of a new rebuilding era for the Thunder. Many expected the 1920 season to be a really low point for the franchise. Looking back at NBA predictions before the year, almost everyone had the Thunder missing the playoffs entirely. Sporting News had OKC as a 12 seed. ESPN had them as a 13 seed going 33-49. Complex Sports had 4 writers make predictions, and not a single one of them had the Thunder in their top 8. The Thunder's win total was set at 32.5 by Vegas, which projected them to be the 13th seed in the West, only ahead of the Suns and the Grizzlies, and the 7th worst team in the NBA overall. There's even that screenshot from before a Thunder game where it says that the Thunder are being given a 0.2% chance to make the playoffs by some ESPN statistic. It was pretty much consensus that this Thunder team was not going to be good. They were not going to make the playoffs. A lot of people thought they wouldn't even get close. It was a year of little to no expectations for the team, with many predicting that they wouldn't even make it through the year before blowing the team up further, potentially dealing away talented players like Chris Paul, Danilo Gallinari, Dennis Schroder, Steven Adams, and so on and so forth. But the Thunder made no such deals before the year, going into the season with the squad that nobody expected to do much of anything at all in that Western Conference. And I can't lie, for the first 20 or so games of the season, the Thunder looked the part of a team that probably wasn't going to make the playoffs. They began the year with a 1-4 start, losing to the Jazz by 5, the Wizards by 12, beating the Warriors by 28, who were unknowingly in for a hellish year that would see them finish very close to the bottom of the standings due to injury, followed by 2 more losses, one to the Russell Westbrook-led Rockets by 4, and one to the Portland Trailblazers by 3. It was a tough opening stretch for the Thunder, but one where OKC did keep games close against some seemingly superior opponents. This was due mainly to the play of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the second-year guard who OKC had acquired as the primary piece of that Paul George trade just a few months earlier. Shai had a pretty good rookie season, putting up 10.8 points per game to go with 3 boards and 3 dimes on a Clippers squad that made the playoffs as an 8 seed and gave the KD Warriors a somewhat tough first-round matchup. And Shai was an integral part to this team. He wasn't just some random who was playing a few minutes here and there. He started 73 games for that squad and was seen by a lot after that year as a really intriguing up-and-coming guard the Clippers were reportedly extremely reluctant to part ways with during PG trade negotiations. We fast forward now to the beginning of his sophomore season, and Shai was playing incredibly well, averaging 21.6, 7 rebounds, and 3.2 assists over the Thunder's first 5 contests. It was clear from day one that the Thunder were really high on Shai. They wanted him to just go out there and do his thing, giving him the green light, letting him be the #1 offensive option on a team with a lot of great offensive players. He would end up leading the team in scoring over this stretch and lead the team in scoring pretty much the entire year, a big jump from Shai, who would eventually, of course, end up becoming the superstar that he is now. But despite Shai starting the year strongly, the team was still losing and would continue to start slowly. Following their 1-4 start, they'd find some wins here and there, including a 127-119 OT win over the Sixers, a game that I was actually at in person, a couple back-to-back close wins over the Pelicans, a second early season win over the Dubs, but they weren't really gaining ground on the West, as outside of those wins, they were losing a lot more. The team wasn't bad, but it certainly wasn't very good, starting the year 8-12, tied for 10th in the Western Conference through the first quarter of the season. It seemed like perhaps the predictions were right and that the Thunder weren't going to be making some Cinderella run to the playoffs after all. However, on Friday, December 6, 2019, everything changed that year. Let me set the scene. It's 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and the Thunder are ready to tip off against the Minnesota Timberwolves in Oklahoma City. This is one of those games that I vividly remember and probably will for the rest of my life, but it certainly didn't seem like that way at the beginning. OKC, as I said, wasn't doing great, and the Timberwolves weren't much better, themselves sitting below 500 at 10-11 on the year at that point. It wasn't a national TV game, it wasn't a battle between two contenders, it was just a random game between two below 500 teams in the early goings of the NBA season, yet it would end up meaning so much for this Thunder squad. The first quarter of the game was back and forth, with the Thunder taking a 3-point lead into the second, thanks to a 3-for-3 start from Shai and Steven Adams, as well as a 3-of-5 start from Danilo Gallinari and Chris Paul. However, Cat would end up dominating both quarters, dropping 16, 4, and 4 by halftime, alongside 14 from Jeff Teague, putting the Timberwolves up 5 going into the third. This first half also saw the debut of Lou Dort, an undrafted rookie out of Arizona State, who Oklahoma City hadn't played up to that point. He didn't do much in his first half of playing, just got a few minutes and grabbed a singular rebound, but he brought great defensive energy to the table from the first moments he was out there. The second half saw the Thunder fire back, led primarily by Chris Paul, who led all Thunder scorers with 13 points in the third, while dishing out 3 dimes. This would eventually become the Thunder's typical recipe, where the rest of the team would do some heavy lifting before Chris Paul would eventually step up towards the end of the game, mostly in the second half, and in those critical moments help the team secure victory. This was an example of him doing exactly that, and there's way more of this to come. But the Thunder, despite this, went into the fourth down 3, primarily because Jeff Teague was literally unstoppable for some reason, and dropped 16 points on perfect shooting in the third. Then the fourth quarter happened. From the beginning, the Thunder turned up the defensive pressure, holding the Wolves scoreless for the first couple minutes, as CP3 and Dennis Schroder made a couple of layups, with Shai eventually joining in with a mid-range jumper to get on the board in the fourth quarter. The play of these 3 guards would become vital to Oklahoma City's success over the course of the season, commonly sharing the court together in a deadly 3-guard lineup that had the ability to just consistently torch opposing teams while holding up defensively due to Chris Paul and Dennis Schroder's defensive capabilities, and Shai's ability and willingness to effectively slot over to the 3 with his 6'6" frame. Halfway through the fourth quarter, Gallinari joined in on the action too, scoring 4 straight points, which, when followed by a Dennis Schroder layup with 5:19 to go, led to a 10-point lead for Oklahoma City as Minnesota called a timeout. It seemed like the Thunder were going to make it out with a win, one that would push them ever so closer to 500. But the Timberwolves very quickly struck back. Over the next 5 minutes after that timeout, Minnesota dominated the game, scoring consistently almost every single time down the court, while the Thunder were unable to buy a bucket by any means. Chris Paul kept OKC close and in the lead for a little bit with a couple of timely mid-range jumpers that again showcased his clutch gene, but the Wolves were just too much and took the lead on a cat dunk with 33 seconds to go, going up 121 to 119. Following this, Dennis Schroder attacked the rim but was unable to convert the layup, leading to a quick timeout from the Wolves after Cat got the board with 17 seconds left. Following this, the Thunder checked in Lou Dort, who immediately made the play of the night up to that point, diving on an errant inbound pass, stealing away the ball and securing possession for OKC, giving them life and a shot at tying or winning the game. This was the first of many incredible defensive plays that Dort would make over the course of the year, but we'll get to those later. Unfortunately, the Thunder were unable to convert on that possession, with CP3 missing a midi before the team would end up fouling Jordan Bell, sending him to the line with a chance to ice the game. Unfortunately for him, he bricked both, but fortunately for the Wolves, Josh Okogie grabbed the offensive rebound with a second left, leading to Cat eventually being fouled post-timeout by Chris Paul, sending him to the line for free throws. Towns would end up surprisingly missing the first free throw, giving the Thunder a slight bit of life, but before the second one, the Wolves checked in Jordan Bell, who Chris Paul noticed had his jersey untucked as he entered the game, which technically is a delay of game violation, so CP3 points this out to the refs, yells at them, goes, hey, he's got his jersey untucked, that's a delay of game, all the typical Chris Paul stuff, and it works. They get a delay of game, which was their second of the night, giving the Thunder a technical free throw, which Danilo Gallinari drilled to make it a 1-point game. It was an all-time Chris Paul moment. When you think about Chris Paul, you think about these veteran, very petty moves, and this one in particular, I think is like the crown jewel of all that stuff that he's always done. Was it petty? Absolutely. Was it hilarious? Even more so. But most importantly, it made it so that when Cat hit his second free throw, the Thunder were only down 2 points. However, the team was without timeouts and had just 1 second remaining, so there was no way the Thunder were going to hit a shot to go to OT or win, right? Wrong, because then Steven Adams and Dennis Schroder connected for one of the best game-time buckets that I personally have ever seen.
So Adams launches it to Schroder. Schroder catches and scores!
It was an electric moment that still gives me chills to this day to watch, and it was truly the exact moment this season turned around. Despite the squad seemingly dead in the water by some miracle, they made it to overtime and destroyed the Wolves when they got there, outscoring them 17-5 in the period, primarily due to 11 points from SGA, eventually winning 139-127. This game had a flash of everything that would eventually lead the Thunder to defying odds over the rest of the year. Shai dominated offensively, dropping 29 points as he continued to show his drastic improvement from his rookie season. Chris Paul took over in clutch moments, dropping 30 points and 7 dimes, while making the veteran plays necessary to get OKC to the finish line. Danilo Gallinari heated up and dropped 21 when the team needed buckets. Steven Adams had a great all-around effort, putting up 22 and 11 to go with 4 blocks and hitting Dennis Schroder with the legendary dime that led the game to overtime in the first place. Dennis Schroder came in and thrived off the bench, dropping 25, 2 and 2, and dominating alongside Shai and CP3 in those 3-guard lineup scenarios. Dort came in and, despite not playing much, made a huge hustle play that gave the Thunder life and locked up in the 7 minutes he actually showed up in. Other guys like Nerlens Noel, Abdul Nader, Darius Baisley contributed as well, with head coach Billy Donovan orchestrating the whole thing. It was a team effort. It took everything from the squad to get this win, which you would think in a vacuum doesn't mean much, but I can tell you the second we won this game, the energy completely shifted. This team almost realized that, hey, we can do stuff like this. We can pull off miracles. We can overcome the odds. After this night, everything changed for the team, and they were about to rocket up the standings directly into the midst of the Western Conference playoff picture. Over their next 43 games, the Thunder would have one of the best records in the league, going 31 and 12, dominating the competition at every single turn. Over this time, Chris Paul went from untradeable and washed to one of the league's best point guards, averaging 18.6 points per game, 5.3 rebounds, and 7.1 assists to go with 1.6 steals over this stretch, while shooting 50% from the field, 36% from 3, and 90% from the line, and dominating in crunch time. And when I say dominating, I mean he was the league's best clutch player that entire season. Over the course of the year, he led the league with 150 clutch points and shot 52.2%, a ridiculous percentage in those high-stakes moments, taking over every single time the Thunder needed him to do so. He would hit threes, he would get to the free throw line, he would dish out dimes, he would hit that consistent mid-range jumper that you knew he was going to take every single time, and it just didn't matter. It was still going to go in. He was so good that he earned not just an All-Star nod, his first since his Clippers days, but he was eventually rewarded with an All-NBA second-team spot as well, something that seemed impossible going into the season. Shai, meanwhile, continued his own ascension, leading the Thunder in scoring with 19.6 points per game, 6.7 boards, and 3.5 dimes, to go with 1.2 steals, while racking up some double-doubles and even a 20-20-10 triple-double against the Minnesota Timberwolves in mid-January. He wouldn't get an All-Star nod this season, but it became pretty clear that Shai was going to be one sooner than later and was one of the best young guards in the entire association. Rounding out the 3-guard lineup, Dennis Schroder was playing like the best bench player in the league, averaging 20.6, 3.6 rebounds, and 4.2 assists over this stretch, while shooting mainly a blistering 41.4% from deep. There were a number of nights where Dennis wasn't just the team's best bench player, but he was the team's best player, period. Not just scoring well, but locking up defensively. He was regularly capable of coming into a game off the bench. The Thunder could be down 10. Schroder comes in, lights up the opposing team, locks up on the other end, and suddenly we've got a lead. If anyone else was having an off night, you could bet $1 billion that Schroder was going to come in and make things happen. Then there was Gallo, who continued to be a sniper from deep, averaging 19.6 points per game over this time, while hitting 40.5% of his threes, taking 7.7 attempts per game. Around the deadline, it was unclear whether or not the Thunder were going to keep Gallo because he had free agency looming, and it was seeming unlikely that he'd be brought back, and this was a move that probably would have ended this team's sustained run at the moment. It would have killed a lot of their momentum, but instead of making the trade, Sam Presti believed in this team and stood pat, letting them continue the dominance that they had shown throughout the year. You had Steven Adams providing the team with nearly nightly double-doubles, putting up 10.9 and 9.5, as well as hitting this half-court three with a shimmy to go along with it. Meanwhile, Dort had gone from not playing for like the first quarter of the year to not just a staple of the rotation, but a starter consistently for the Thunder. He didn't do much offensively, but defensively, he was locking up on a nightly basis, consistently giving effort, hustle. He brought an energy to the team that they really needed and was a big part of why they were so successful. the team also got solid contributions from other guys like Abdul Nader, Nerlens Noel, Hamidou Diallo, Darius Baisley, Mike Muscala, Terrence Ferguson as well, amongst others. Billy Donovan, meanwhile, was getting some Coach of the Year buzz as he had the team playing way above their expected level and was consistently putting out good lineups. For example, the 3-guard lineup that was really the Thunder's bread and butter. In fact, the trio of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Dennis Schroder, and Chris Paul made up the league's best lineup. They outscored opponents by a league best 28.6 points per 100 possessions when Paul, Shai, and Schroder were out there. Not to mention the fact that when the Thunder had Paul, Shai, and Schroder out there with Adams and Gallinari, they had the league's best 5-man lineup amongst all lineups that played at least 100 minutes together. They had a net rating together of 29.9. That's ridiculous. That's 7 better than any other 5-man unit. Those 5 guys were by far the best lineup in the league this season, a lineup that a lot of people thought wouldn't even be capable of making the playoffs. This team was the definition of firing on all cylinders, and by the time the season shut down, they had managed to push their record to 40-24, a far cry from their 8-12 start, and this was good enough to come to a tie with the Houston Rockets at the 5 seed in the West. This was the team that had just traded the Thunder 4 draft assets to take Paul away from them, and now OKC was right there with them in the standings. It became clear that the Thunder were no longer a fun story, they were a threat. Then, as you know, on March 11th, the Thunder were set to play the Utah Jazz in a game that would ultimately be the catalyst for the NBA and consequently the entire sports world getting shut down for months due to the pandemic. It was really weird watching that game live. I remember sitting on my couch, waiting for it to start. It wasn't starting, and it was supposed to start like 10 minutes ago, and that was even after considering how the NBA always starts games late, and then all of a sudden they made the announcement that it was shut down, that the season was getting postponed later that night. It was wild. Eventually, the league would restart in the bubble with the Thunder playing their first game on August 1st against the Utah Jazz, nonetheless, a game that the Thunder would end up winning. And over the remaining 7 bubble games, the Thunder would go back and forth trading wins and losses, finishing out the regular season with a record of 44-28, tied with the Rockets out of all teams for the 4 seed, setting up a playoff matchup between these two trade partners from the offseason. All throughout the year and as the bubble winded down, this is the matchup that I personally wanted to see, and I feel like the rest of the world wanted to see as well. It was Russell Westbrook and James Harden versus their former team Chris Paul versus the team that didn't want him, a battle between a team that wanted to contend and a team that didn't get the memo that they were supposed to be rebuilding and instead said they were going to battle for a playoff spot. Now, unfortunately for the Rockets, Russell Westbrook was dealing with an injury that would keep him sidelined for the beginning of the series. However, they didn't let that faze them. The Rockets would actually end up blowing out the Thunder in games 1 and 2 of this series, with Harden dropping 37 in game 1, as Shai and Schroder both struggled greatly from the field, and Dort missed with a knee injury, taking away the Thunder's primary answer for James Harden. Game 2 was a more all-around effort for Houston, as 7 of the 8 Rockets players that played scored in double figures en route to their win, as Shai bounced back with a 30-piece, but the team just wasn't able to keep pace with the Rockets' 3-point barrage that came that night. One positive to take away from this game, though, was that Dort returned and put the clamps on Harden, holding him to just 5 of 16 shooting from the field. If the Thunder were going to have any chance of coming back in this series, they were going to need a lot more of this from Lou Dort, and they would end up getting exactly that, winning Game 3 in blowout fashion, as Harden shot just 3 of 13 from deep and below 50% from the field, despite putting up a gaudy 38-point total. The 3 guards came to play in this one, with Shai putting up 23, 7, and 6, CP3 dropping 26, 6, and 5, and Schroder adding a team-high 29 points to go with 5 boards and 5 dimes, in addition to Gallinari's 20 himself. Game 4 saw Harden bounce back somewhat, dropping 32, 8, and 15, but Dort did help to cause 4 turnovers, and again force him to shoot below 50% from the field. Schroder was again the hero in this one, putting up 30 points, while Paul added 26, and Shai dropped an 18 and 12 double-double, and tied the series up 2-2. The Thunder had again managed to claw their way back after a lot of people thought they were dead in the water. Despite all the obstacles, they were back in this thing. However, the hype for that win was short-lived, as the Rockets destroyed OKC in Game 5 in Russ's return. Now, Westbrook wasn't great in this game, but pretty much everyone else was. Harden had a very efficient 31 points, Covington added 20, Eric Gordon had 20, and they held the Thunder to just 80 points along the way, with the team shooting 31.5% as a whole. OKC was on the verge of elimination. The Cinderella story was seemingly on the verge of wrapping up, but they weren't quitting just yet. Game 6 was a bloodbath, with the two teams trading blows left and right, all the way down to the wire. It was a rough game for Shai, who had just 10 points. It was a rough night from Schroder, who had just 12, but Gallinari did what he does and stepped up, drilling 4 threes en route to 25 points when OKC needed him most. And of course, Chris Paul, at the final moments as he did all season in games, did so again with the season on the line, dropping 28.7 boards, 3 assists, and 3 steals on 50% shooting, including a 15-point fourth quarter where he was 5 of 7 from the field and a perfect 3 of 3 from downtown to go with a couple of steals. Again, this is what he did all season. Whenever the Thunder needed him in the clutch, he was there. And with the season on the line, he saved the year. Through this play, the Thunder escaped with a 104-100 win, pushing the series to 7 games against all odds. Then in Game 7, we got a classic. Still to this day, this is one of the best and most stressful basketball games that I personally ever watched. The story at the heart of it all was none other than Lu Dort. All series, Lu had been playing lockdown defense on Harden, yet the offense had been really rough. He was so bad on that end that people were talking about whether or not Lu Dort was quote-unquote the worst offensive player in the league, and the Rockets had kind of started to employ this game plan of just letting Lu Dort shoot. Coming to this game, the Thunder were not just going to need Lu's defense, but they were going to need him to find his outside shot, even if just a little bit. And luckily for the Thunder, he did exactly that. In the first quarter, he went just 2 of 6 for 6 points, but went 3 of 4 from deep in the second quarter, giving him 15 points on 50% shooting at half, which led all scorers. Meanwhile, he was also clamping James Harden, with the Beard having just 10 points on 2 of 8 shooting and 3 turnovers by halftime. This was exactly what OKC needed. He kept it up, hitting a 3 in the third and holding Harden to 0 of 4 shooting, but the team as a whole was falling behind at this point. They just weren't able to keep pace, as Russ had 10 in the third quarter and was really beginning to find his rhythm with a couple of Rocket shooters peppering in threes here and there. Heading into the fourth quarter, the Thunder were down 5, having just 12 minutes left to save this dream season. And who else was going to step up in that scenario other than Chris Paul? He would go ahead and put up 10 points in the fourth quarter on 3 of 4 shooting, including 2 of 2 from 3 to go with 2 dimes and a steal, while Lu Dort drilled another 3, giving him 6 on the night and 30 points total in the process. The game went back and forth with a lead changing left and right heading into the final minutes. With 1:42 left, Shai hit a big 3 to give OKC a 1-point lead. PJ Tucker would answer immediately with a jumper of his own on the other end, putting the Rockets up 1. Eric Gordon would have a turnover, which CP3 took and brought down the court, finding his way almost all the way to the rim for a short jumper that he barely missed. But on the other end, Russ misses a layup and the Thunder have a fast break attempt. The ball got to the hot-handed Lu Dort. He let it fly, only for James Harden to come from behind and block it, forcing Lu to grab it and try to throw it off him out of bounds, missing, giving Houston the ball up 1 with just 2 seconds left. I've got to give it to James Harden. It was a hell of a play. As much as it broke my heart, this was huge for him. A guy that's been consistently labeled as a playoff choker and had been given hell by Lu Dort in defense, comes down the other end and gives Lu problems defensively, saving the game for his team. I still believe to this day, if Lu gets that 3 off, he's hitting it. That was just the magic in the building that night. Maybe he does end up bricking it, but I believe that if he gets that shot off, he hits it and the Thunder almost assuredly win this series. But James Harden wasn't even going to give that shot a chance to go in, blocking it and giving the Rockets an almost seemingly unfumbleable scenario at the end of the game. The Thunder would eventually get the ball back, having a chance to get a shot off and send the game to overtime, but they weren't able to do so, and the Rockets win the series 4-3 in the final moments, sending the Thunder home. If I'm being honest, I'm not sure I've ever wanted to win a series more than I wanted that one in the midst of Game 7. The team was just so incredibly fun, and I didn't want the run to be over. Plus, the thought of overcoming Houston after the offseason connections to the trades would have just been a really fun and wild storyline. This team overcame all the predictions, defied all expectations, proved that they were capable of not just being a playoff team, but a scary one at that, almost taking out a squad that many people going into the year thought were going to be championship contenders. Chris Paul showed that he had a lot more in the tank. Shai showed who he could be in flashes of who he was going to become down the line. Dennis Schroder showed that he was capable of a big role somewhere and was completely robbed of 6th Man of the Year. I could make a full video ranting about how Schroder was robbed of 6th Man of the Year by Montrezl Harrell, who was on the same team as Lou Williams, who also finished top 3 in 6th Man of the Year voting. How are you going to have 2 6th men that finished top 3? Like, I just don't know. That, again, could make a whole video ranting about that one, but basically just know that he was robbed. Gallo showed that he could still play and was worth a sizable contract in free agency. Lu Dort proved that he belonged in this league as an undrafted player. Everybody proved something this season all across the roster, and I just wanted them to win so bad. But in the end, they did fall short, bowing out in the first round to a Houston team that would go on to face the Lakers in the second round, losing a pretty quick series before eventually trading Russ in the offseason and James Harden not too long afterwards. That same offseason, the Thunder would undergo a fire sale of their own, with very few members of that 2020 team remaining on the roster for 2021. It began with Chris Paul being dealt to the Phoenix Suns, sending him to play alongside Devin Booker, a move that would instantly reward the Suns with a finals berth that year and eventually earn Chris Paul another massive contract, something that seemed seemingly impossible before his time in Oklahoma City, a stint that he credits for reviving his career. Dennis Schroder was sent to the Lakers to help them in their title defense, becoming their starting point guard, and although they didn't end up winning the title, he played pretty well when he was there. Steven Adams was dealt to the Pelicans as they were seeking a physical five to go alongside their young duo of Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram. Danilo Gallinari was sent to the Hawks in a sign-and trade, getting a bag in the process, and helping the Hawks advance to the Eastern Conference Finals for the first time in around half a decade. In fact, the only two players remaining from that 2020 squad till now are Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Dort. Shai was, of course, kept to be the team's franchise player, a role that he's now grown into as one of the league's best guards, an All-NBA first-teamer, and in my opinion, a future MVP. Dort has gained a reputation now as one of the league's best perimeter defenders and got a pretty big bag of his own recently. It was really sad to see that team get blown up, but it was understandable. The Thunder likely needed to undergo a full rebuild if they ever wanted to get back to championship contention, and guys like Chris Paul, Schroder, Adams, and Gallo deserved a chance to try and compete somewhere else throughout that process. Sometimes I do think about what that team could have become if we kept them together, especially if Shai progressed the way that he continued to do. Like, imagine this Shai now on that team, or even just the Shai from a couple years ago. Could that team have made some more noise? And that is something, again, like I said, I think about, and maybe someday I'll make a full video talking about that, but for now, it's just a hypothetical. As I said earlier in the video, this is probably my favorite individual season of Thunder basketball ever. I know that might sound crazy to some of you because we went to the Western Conference Finals, we went to an NBA Finals, like we've had some deep playoff runs, but I don't know, this one in particular was just special. It was a year of defying expectations. It was a year of proving everybody wrong, a year that I got to enjoy with others really for the first time because I hadn't been on NBA Twitter up until that point. I made my Twitter account, or at least started using it, before this season, and throughout the year I started gaining some traction as an account as the Thunder continued to go up the standings. Really, it blew me up and propelled me to the point where I am now. I wasn't even doing YouTube at that point, but this season, the passion that I developed for talking about basketball over the course of that year is what pushed me to this point. If the Thunder didn't have this breakthrough season, I might not even be here right now. It was that critical in getting me to where I am at the moment. It was really special, and this season will forever hold a really, really important place in my heart as a Thunder fan, as a basketball fan, and as someone who at this point has started to make a career in the space of talking about the game of basketball. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I hope you could kind of get a sense of how fun and magical this season was. If you have a favorite moment from this season that maybe I didn't cover in this video because there was just so much to cover, let me know down below in the comments who are some of your favorite individual teams of all time, and maybe I'll make some videos about some of those other squads at some point soon. But yeah, I really appreciate y'all watching. Please leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. If you enjoy these longer form videos, also let me know. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say it back.